I don't pay attention to gossip. Folks who do spend their lives chasing ghosts, making trouble out of nothing, driving themselves crazy over lies. But this wasn't just idle talk, the kind neighbors swap across fences that disappears by morning. This was coming from Mike, my oldest buddy, a man who never spoke unless he had something important to say. The way he said it, leaning in like he was passing me a secret he wished he didn't know, sent a chill straight to my stomach before he even opened his mouth. "You better watch your wife," he mumbled, swirling the bourbon in his glass like it held something too heavy to say clearly. I froze, gripping my glass tighter. The noise of Benny's bar, the clinking glasses, quiet conversations, even the old jukebox in the corner, seemed to vanish. All I heard was my own heartbeat, steady, loud, pounding like a warning. Mike wasn't a troublemaker. He didn't spread stories for fun. If he said something, he saw something, or heard something. I could have pressed him right then, demanded every last detail. But I didn't, because I already knew. For months, something had felt off. It wasn't one big obvious change, but a bunch of small things stacking up, slowly surrounding me like walls I didn't notice were being built. Emily had always been bright, cheerful, the kind of woman who lit up a room just by walking into it. But recently, she'd grown distant, careful. It was like she chose her words extra carefully, afraid I'd notice something hidden behind them. She'd been on her phone more, smiling sometimes, then quickly flipping it face down when I came into view. It was like there were secrets she didn't want me stumbling onto. Then came the music. A few months ago, out of nowhere, she said she wanted to learn piano. Claimed she'd always regretted not learning as a child. I thought it was odd since Emily had never once talked about playing music before. But who was I to stop her? I hired an instructor, some aspiring young musician she found online named Lucas. Young, handsome, the type of guy who probably spent more time fixing his hair than holding a real job. When I met him, his shirt seemed intentionally tight, like he wanted everyone to notice. His handshake felt flimsy, only fingertips, like he didn't want to risk hurting himself. Men like him bothered me. No strength, no real substance. Just flashy smiles and soft hands that reached for things they had no business touching. At first, I convinced myself it was my imagination, jealousy talking. What husband wouldn't feel uneasy with his wife spending hours alone beside some pretty boy musician, sitting shoulder to shoulder on the bench, his hand guiding hers, his whispers correcting her mistakes? I kept telling myself it was innocent, professional. But was it? Mike wouldn't have said anything if it was. I didn't confront Emily that night. Didn't ask her where she'd been, what she'd done, or who she'd seen. Instead, I came home quietly, pretending everything was normal, even though nothing was. The house smelled like vanilla candles, her favorite scent to burn at night. The living room was spotless, coffee table shining, blanket folded perfectly on the couch. Everything was tidy and neat, the kind of home you'd see on TV, the kind where no problems exist. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, humming softly as she cleaned up, unaware I was watching. I stood there quietly, staring at her, resenting her, angry at myself for not noticing sooner, furious because I knew exactly how this story would end. I wanted to grab a chair, smash it against the wall, punch through the plaster, destroy this false image of our perfect life. Instead, I held it all inside, letting it burn in my stomach as I silently went upstairs. That night, I couldn't sleep. I didn't even bother trying. I just lay there in darkness, eyes fixed on the ceiling, anger spreading through my bones. This was only beginning. Morning took forever, or maybe it was just me. I spent all night awake, staring, jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. I didn't move, didn't even glance at Emily sleeping beside me, breathing quietly, peacefully without a single care, as if she wasn't betraying me. Part of me wanted to wake her, shake her until her innocent eyes popped open, so she could see me, the man she married, the one she promised before God to love, looking at her as the biggest mistake of his life. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed proof. Mike wouldn't warn me without reason. He wasn't careless with his words. But I wouldn't accuse Emily without clear evidence. Because once I did, if I was wrong, if there was a reasonable explanation, it would shatter everything. And I wasn't sure if I'd survive the fallout. So I got up silently, showered, dressed, and moved through the house like it was any other morning, even though a storm brewed inside me. Emily stirred briefly, but stayed asleep. Good. I needed more time. First, I checked her phone. I wasn't proud of it. I'd never been the kind of man who snooped through his wife's things. Never had reason to. But standing there in our dim bedroom, Mike's warning echoed in my head, reminding me trust must be earned with honesty. If Emily was sneaking around, then checking her phone wasn't breaking trust, it was proving no trust remained. Her phone lay face down on the nightstand, plugged in, intentionally hidden, like she didn't want any surprise notifications catching my attention. I picked it up, heart racing. Locked. Not just locked, changed. The passcode had been altered. A month ago, it had been our anniversary date. Simple. Easy. Something we both remembered. But now a new code stood between me and whatever she was hiding. My stomach clenched tight, twisted sharply, feeling like a knife was slowly turning. She was hiding something. Hiding him. Carefully, I set the phone back exactly as I found it, ensuring I made no noise. If she woke and caught me, my anger would explode before I had answers. So I quietly went downstairs to the kitchen. The smell of yesterday's coffee lingered, bitter and stale. I poured myself a fresh cup and sat at the table, staring at the steam rising into the morning sun. I needed to think, needed a plan. A short while later, Emily's footsteps softly echoed down the stairs, light and carefree, oblivious that today wasn't just another ordinary day. "Good morning," she said warmly, casually, as if she hadn't been lying every day straight to my face. I didn't respond immediately, just tapped my thumb against the side of my coffee mug, eyes fixed on the surface of the coffee. She paused, noticing my silence. "Everything okay?" I finally raised my eyes to her. She stood there in the doorway, wrapped in her favorite blue robe, hair tousled from sleep. She looked exactly like the woman I'd married, exactly like the woman I share my life with. But she wasn't. Not anymore. I managed a stiff smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. Emily stood there, acting innocent, pretending she was still the sweet, caring wife I'd married. There was a time I believed it. I used to love how she smelled when she woke up, how her lips felt soft against mine first thing in the morning. Now it just turned my stomach. She leaned over, brushing her lips against my cheek and lingering a bit too long. She was playing her part perfectly, affectionate, caring, the perfect wife. It used to fool me, but now I knew better. I spent the rest of the morning fighting the urge to confront her, to throw the truth out into the open and watch her stumble, trying to deny it. But I held back. I wasn't ready yet. Later, I called Mike. "You actually see them together?" I skipped any hello, any small talk. I couldn't wait for polite introductions. Not now. He paused on the other end, letting out a long breath. Not myself, but I know someone who did. My stomach churned again, tight and angry. Ooh, a friend. Reliable guy. He saw them at a club called Velvet Lounge. Emily had told me she'd gone out with her girlfriends that night. My grip tightened on the phone, so hard I thought it might break in two. Mike cleared his throat, cautious. "I wouldn't bring this up if I wasn't sure. You know me better than that." I didn't know. Mike was cautious, a quiet type who didn't speak unless he had solid proof. He wouldn't stir things up over nothing. "Thanks," I said finally, my voice stiff. "I'll handle it." I ended the call without another word, just sitting there, gripping the phone until my knuckles went white. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, loud and furious. Someone was messing with my marriage, thinking he could just walk in and take what's mine without consequences. That wasn't going to happen. No way. The rest of the day passed slowly, painfully. Each step felt heavy like walking through mud. Every breath felt forced, controlled. If I slipped for even a moment, I'd lose it, tear everything apart with my bare hands. Emily went about her day, as usual, unaware that I knew. She folded clothes, smiled, acted like everything was fine. I could have confronted her right there, yelled until she confessed, but I didn't. Not yet. A smart man doesn't rush into a fight. He waits patiently until the other guy drops his guard. Then he makes his move. That's exactly what I planned to do. Evening arrived, and Emily casually announced she was heading out with friends. She stood there, smiling sweetly, lying right to my face. "Jessica invited me over." Just as girls, she said easily. Liar. I forced myself to nod calmly, sipping coffee slowly while imagining my hands around that musician's neck. How late you think you'll be? Not too late, she said, smiling softly. She grabbed her coat and purse, glancing at her phone as she headed toward the door. Just a couple drinks. As soon as she shut the door behind her, I grabbed my keys and headed out too. I parked down the street from Velvet Lounge, the neon sign flickering weakly, bathing the sidewalk in a yellow glow. The whole area felt wrong, like something ugly hiding behind velvet curtains. Emily had told me she was meeting friends. Clearly, she'd lied again. I watched from my truck as Emily appeared, walking beside her piano teacher. Lucas was his name, young, good-looking, overly polished. His suit fit him too perfectly, tailored like he needed everyone to notice. He rested a casual hand close to Emily's waist, just close enough to set my blood boiling. I should have stepped out right there. Should have dragged him into the street and reminded him whose wife he was touching. But I didn't. Not yet. Let them feel comfortable. Let them think no one was watching. They disappeared inside, and after a few minutes, I followed. The place was dim, cozy jazz humming from hidden speakers. Couples whispered in booths, oblivious to everything but each other. I spotted them immediately, settled close together in a corner booth. Lucas leaned in, whispering something in Emily's ear, smiling like he had nothing to fear. I clenched my fists, jaw tight, fury spreading through my veins like fire. I could have stormed over, pulled her from that booth, made a scene loud enough to humiliate them both. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of such an easy way out. No, they deserved much worse. I left without confronting them, heading back to my truck with slow, deliberate steps. Anger pounded in my chest so hard I could hardly breathe. I knew exactly how this would end, and it wouldn't be pretty. The drive home felt endless. I kept my speed down, trying not to crash the truck into a tree, just to relieve some of the pressure in my chest. Emily was going to learn that actions had consequences. And Lucas, with his soft hands and expensive suits, was going to wish he'd never laid eyes on my wife. I forced a tight smile. Didn't get much sleep. She frowned softly, walking closer and gently rubbing my shoulder, pretending to care. "You seemed stressed lately." Stressed. That was one way to say it. "Just got a lot to think about," I said quietly. She leaned in, placing a slow, tender kiss on my temple, holding it just a bit too long. She was playing the loving wife perfectly, affectionate, devoted. Once upon a time, I fell for that act. I used to love waking up to her scent, loved how her lips felt warm against my face. Now it just made me nauseous. I stayed perfectly still until she stepped back, humming to herself as she walked over to the refrigerator, acting as if nothing had changed. I could have confronted her right then, could have looked her straight in the eyes and told her I knew everything. But I didn't. I had my own game to play. That afternoon, I called Mike. "Did you actually see them together?" I asked bluntly. No hello, no small talk. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. There was a brief silence, followed by a heavy sigh. I didn't personally, but I know someone who did. My stomach tightened painfully. Who? A buddy named Kevin. He handles security at a jazz club downtown, the Velvet Lounge. He saw your wife there last weekend with that piano instructor. Said they were tucked away in a private corner booth, looking real cozy. I knew exactly the kind of place he meant. Dark lighting, pricey cocktails, discreet booths hidden from view. Perfect for secret meetings. Emily had told me she was out with friends that evening. I squeezed the phone so hard it almost cracked. Mike spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I wouldn't have brought this up unless I was sure. But it ain't right keeping it from you." I knew he was right. Mike wasn't the type to gossip or cause trouble. If he spoke up, he had reason. "Thanks, Mike," I said stiffly. "I'll handle it from here." I ended the call quickly, gripping the phone tight, feeling the pounding of my heart echoing in my ears. My mind raced, picturing Emily sitting across from Lucas, smiling at him in the candlelight. The same woman who'd stood in front of God and promised me loyalty, now laughing and flirting with another man. This wasn't going to end quietly. I spent the entire day walking around feeling like I was about to explode, carefully controlling each breath, every step. Any slip, even a small one, would unleash all my anger. Emily moved about normally, unaware, folding clothes, humming softly, pretending nothing was wrong. I could have confronted her, could have torn everything wide open, but I didn't. Not yet, because when I finally made my move, I wouldn't miss. I waited patiently, letting her believe I was clueless. That evening, she casually mentioned plans with her friend Jessica. She invited me over, just as girls tonight, she said sweetly. Liar. I nodded slowly, calmly sipping my coffee, imagining grabbing that pretty boy musician by the throat. Don't stay out too late, I said quietly. I won't, she replied, smiling like everything was perfectly fine as she walked out the door. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her, driving carefully, keeping a safe distance so she wouldn't notice. I parked a block from the Velvet Lounge, watching from the shadows as Emily stepped out of her car, meeting her instructor, Lucas, wearing an expensive suit that hugged his frame just a bit too tightly. His hand rested lightly on her lower back, comfortably, casually. She laughed, relaxed and happy, leaning into him as if it was perfectly natural. Something snapped inside me, anger surging, hot and violent. I could have stormed up to them, grabbed him by that expensive collar, smashed his handsome face into the pavement right then and there. But that would have been too easy. I let them walk inside first, giving them enough space to believe they were safe. Then I followed, stepping into the dim club. Low lights, soft jazz, couples hidden away in booths. Emily and Lucas were already settled, sitting close in a secluded corner. His arm was around her, hand resting too comfortably. She laughed softly, like nothing else mattered. I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to confront them immediately. Too easy. Instead, I turned and walked back outside, feeling a rage I'd never known before. She thought she could fool me, that I was too blind to see, that she could break every promise we'd ever made and walk away smiling. She was wrong. I drove home slowly, not because I needed time. I already knew exactly what I was going to do, but because driving any faster would have sent me straight through a guardrail. Emily had no idea what was coming next. I kept my voice steady, unnaturally calm. Come on, Emily, I said quietly. You were about to say something. Don't stop now. She swallowed hard, eyes darting nervously. There it was. Right there. That slight quiver of guilt, hesitation obvious as daylight. My gaze shifted to Lucas, standing stiffly beside her, his eyes wide and uncertain. And what about you? I asked him sharply. Anything to add? He opened his mouth, paused, then quickly shut it again. Pathetic. Silence stretched between us, heavy as lead. My heart thundered loudly, but my face showed none of it. I stayed cool, controlled. I wanted them both to squirm. Finally, I chuckled softly, without humor. I began slowly, shaking my head. For a while, I actually hoped it was all in my head, that maybe I was just seeing ghosts. But you two made sure I couldn't ignore it anymore, didn't you? Emily opened her mouth, desperate to defend herself. It isn't what it looks like. I cut her off sharply. My laugh was bitter, low, angry. You sure about that? Because from here, it looks like my wife, the woman who stood next to me in front of family and friends, promising to be faithful, is sneaking around behind my back with some useless piano-playing pretty boy. Lucas flinched visibly, losing the last bit of arrogance he had left. Good. He deserved worse. Emily reached for me, desperate. Please, just listen. I jerked my arm back sharply, sending her stumbling backward. Don't touch me. I snapped harshly, the words coming out sharper than I intended. For a brief moment, her confident act cracked. Her face twisted, not with guilt, not with remorse, but genuine fear. Good. Lucas began to speak, weak and hesitant. Look, I never meant. Shut your mouth. I snapped coldly, stepping closer. He shut up immediately. Even better. I narrowed my eyes at him. Let me make something clear. You're going to walk away. You're going to vanish and forget Emily ever existed. If I ever catch sight of you again, or even hear your name whispered, I promise you'll regret ever setting eyes on my wife. He swallowed hard, visibly shaken. I understand. I stepped closer still, until he flinched back. Emily reached out suddenly, grabbing my arm. Please. I pulled my arm away sharply enough that she nearly lost her balance. Don't ever touch me again, I hissed quietly. Her expression changed again, desperate and afraid, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. Lucas took the opportunity to back away slowly, eyes wide, like a frightened animal realizing he'd walked straight into danger. He scrambled toward his car, practically falling over himself as he fled into the night. I let him go. He wasn't the real problem. She was. Emily stood frozen, arms crossed protectively over herself, shivering slightly in the cold night air. Silence stretched again, so heavy it felt suffocating. Finally, she tried speaking once more. I didn't mean to. Another hollow laugh slipped out of me. Didn't mean to? Don't insult me, Emily. Don't pretend this was some accident. Her breathing grew uneven. It wasn't. How long? I interrupted, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. She stared at me, eyes wide, mouth trembling, and her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Tell me the truth, Emily, I demanded softly, stepping closer again. How long? She hesitated just another moment. Then, quietly, almost too softly to hear, she answered, 5 months. 5 months. Nearly half a year she'd smiled across from me at dinner, whispered goodnight, pretended we were fine, while all along she'd been seeing him. How long did you think you could get away with it? I asked, my voice harsh with barely controlled anger. She shook her head helplessly. It wasn't supposed to. Save it. I interrupted sharply. I don't need your excuses. Emily flinched, falling silent. I stood there for another moment, letting the anger wash over me, feeling the betrayal cut deep into my chest. But I refused to let it show. Instead, I looked her straight in the eyes, my voice calm and clear. This is over, I told her. And believe me, you have no idea how ugly this is going to get. I spoke softly, calmly. Too calm. Go ahead, Emily. Finish what you were about to say. She swallowed hard, fear flickering briefly in her eyes. There it was. Her hesitation, clear as daylight. Her tears weren't because she felt guilty or sorry. She was crying because she'd gotten caught. Because the comfortable world she'd built, where she had her husband waiting at home and another man to keep her entertained, had finally fallen apart. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. And you, Lucas? Got something you want to say? He opened his mouth, trying to speak, but nothing came out. Coward. The silence dragged on. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but I stayed calm, waiting. I wanted them uncomfortable, squirming, afraid. Finally, I let out a bitter, empty laugh. I really hoped I was just imagining things. Maybe just paranoid. But you two made this too damn easy. Emily's eyes widened, desperate. It's not what you think. Oh, don't start with that. I interrupted sharply. You sure? Because from here it sure looks like my wife, the woman who stood in front of everyone we care about and promised me forever, is sneaking around with some cheap musician behind my back. She reached for me again, grabbing at my sleeve. I was lonely. I didn't mean. Lonely, I barked, pulling away sharply. Don't insult me with that lonely act. You weren't lonely. You were selfish. You wanted more, and instead of fixing things with me, you chose him. I turned toward Lucas, whose face had drained of all color. You got anything to say? He opened his mouth, shut it again, backing away slowly. Coward, I spat, taking another step toward him. You think you're walking away from this? Emily grabbed my arm again, frantic now. Please don't. I jerked free so fast she nearly lost her balance. Don't touch me again. The fear in her eyes was real now, raw and undeniable. She knew everything was falling apart. Not just her marriage, but the comfortable lie she'd built around herself. Lucas swallowed hard, voice trembling. Listen, man, Shut your mouth. I snapped, stepping forward again. He shut up immediately. Here's what happens next, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You're going to vanish. You're going to forget Emily ever existed. And if I ever catch even a glimpse of you, I promise you'll regret ever touching my wife. He nodded silently, backing away like a scared animal. Smart choice. Lucas turned quickly, stumbling as he hurried to his car. Within moments, he was gone. That left only Emily, standing alone, shivering in the cold night air, finally aware of just how bad things had gotten. "Please," she whispered desperately. "We can fix this." I laughed bitterly. "Fix this? You think I want you back?" She flinched visibly, her body shrinking as if she finally saw me clearly for the first time. "I'll do anything," she pleaded softly, tears sliding down her face. "I'll never see him again, I swear." "You think that changes anything?" My voice came out colder than I'd ever heard it. "You think after what you've done, after everything, you're still someone I could want?" Her face crumbled, the last bit of her hope breaking apart right in front of me. She knew she'd destroyed it all. Not just the marriage, not just trust, but every ounce of love I'd ever felt. It was all gone. Forever. I stared at her, the woman I devoted my life to, the woman who'd casually thrown it all away. And I felt nothing but emptiness. "It's over, Emily," I said quietly, evenly. "You destroyed this." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, shattered, alone, finally seeing the ruins she'd made. I got in my truck, started the engine, and drove off without looking back. I drove for hours, nowhere in particular, just away from Emily, from Lucas, from the wreckage they'd left behind. The road stretched on endlessly ahead, dark and empty, mirroring how I felt inside. Everything I'd once loved, every part of the life I'd built with Emily, was gone now. Nothing left but the hollow feeling deep in my gut. The man I used to be was gone too. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot, shut off the engine, and just sat there in silence, gripping the wheel, breathing slow. Everything I once had, everything I once believed was gone. Emily had made her choice. Now I was making mine. I kept replaying her words over and over again in my head. "I still love you. I was just lonely." It was all garbage. Every last word of it. Emily wasn't lonely. She wasn't confused or lost or whatever pathetic story she planned to spin. She made her choice repeatedly. She looked at me, looked at our life together, and decided it wasn't good enough. Now she was scared, but not because she'd hurt me. She wasn't sorry. She was only afraid of what was coming next, because now she'd lose everything. I stared at the empty road stretching ahead, the lights from the gas station still faintly glowing behind me. I had choices. I could drive home, grab my things, and vanish, leaving her behind like she'd done to me. Or I could march back home right now, toss every possession she had onto the front lawn, and let the neighbors witness exactly who Emily really was. But no, I wanted something different. I wanted her to feel this betrayal as deeply as I did, not as a simple mistake or something she could sob her way through. I wanted her to understand it as a consequence. I knew exactly how I'd make that happen. I started the engine again, but I didn't head back home. Instead, I drove straight to the only person who'd truly have my back in this situation. Mike. His house was dark when I arrived, except for a single porch light, left burning as if he'd expected my visit. I knocked hard on the door, waiting impatiently as footsteps approached from inside. The door swung open, and Mike immediately understood. He sighed deeply. Damn. Without a word, he stepped aside. I walked straight to his kitchen, grabbing a beer from the refrigerator like I owned the place. Mike leaned against the counter, watching me quietly. "You finally saw it for yourself, didn't you?" he asked calmly. I twisted the cap off and took a long drink before nodding slowly. "Yeah, I did." He didn't push for details. He already knew enough. He simply waited until I was ready to speak again. I set the bottle down firmly on the counter, locking eyes with him. "I'm going to ruin her," I said flatly. Mike didn't flinch, didn't question it. "All right." I leaned in, bracing myself against the counter. "I want her gone, Mike. I want her to leave empty-handed. I want her to regret what she's done every single day of her miserable life." He studied me thoughtfully for a moment, then rubbed his jaw. "You really want my advice?" I didn't, but nodded anyway. "Don't rush it," Mike said slowly. "Don't just toss her out tonight. You got the advantage right now. Take your time. Make her feel it." I narrowed my eyes, curious despite myself. "Ow!" Mike took a slow sip of beer. "Keep your cool. No yelling. No breaking things. Don't give her an easy way out or a story she can tell people later about how you lost control. Just let her wonder. Make her worry about how much you know, how much you've figured out." He set his bottle back down, and the moment she thinks she's safe, that's when you slam the door in her face. I imagined it, Emily pacing around our home, uneasy, glancing at her phone constantly, waiting for the explosion. Watching her slowly unravel day by day, knowing I had the power to end it whenever I chose. Then, when she finally thought she might escape this cleanly, I crushed any hope she had left. Emily didn't deserve mercy. She deserved every bit of what was coming. I finished my beer in silence, thanked Mike with a nod, and stepped out into the early morning light. Dawn had broken, casting a pale glow across the neighborhood as I drove back to the house. I parked quietly, sat there a moment, staring at the place that had once been ours. But not anymore. Now it belonged to me alone. I walked inside calmly, the familiar aroma of coffee still lingering in the kitchen. Emily was still asleep. Perfect. I poured myself a fresh cup, sat at the table as if it was just another ordinary morning, and waited. She had no idea what was about to happen next. And that, above everything else, was the best part.